Hey everybody, my name's Andy Needham. I'm a freelance motion designer based in London, and I've been working in the industry for like well over 15 years, probably even more. Can't remember, it's been such a long time. I'm also a digital artist and educator. And before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to share my current reel, and then we'll get into it. So. So yeah, I mentioned that I do education as well. I've been creating courses on LinkedIn Learning, which is formerly lynda.com, for quite a few years now, since about 2013. And it's great for me because I can form a deeper understanding of the software that I'm teaching, and I love sharing that knowledge. And you can find, as I said, some of the courses I've created on LinkedIn Learning mainly, but also Grayscale Gorilla if you're a Plus subscriber. And I've also contributed to C4D Ascent, which is EJ Hassanfratz's course over on School of Motion. So these are some of the best companies in the industry if you want to go and learn more about C4D. So the presentation, we're talking about achieving similar results but using different methods. And the first part of this is just a little exercise that I was designing, really, just to think creatively, using different methods of the software, like actually touching various parts, not going to all the familiar tools, right? So it's just to take a cube and taper it, right? But using keeping it as a mesh, a primitive, so we can't make it editable, and it has to look exactly the same as that. So we're going to get into how we do it with various deformers, capsules, generators, and nodes. And it's a very good way of if you're not interested in, or if you haven't had a chance to look at nodes and things like that, this is actually quite a good way of doing something that you're very familiar with, and then abstracting it into the new system. So let's dive in and just have a quick look at what we got here. So obviously, the basic idea is, and if you've never made a deformer or a cube, I'll just go through that now, just so we're all up to speed. But essentially, you can use these whole list of deformers that we have here, and if they're on a child or in the same level of hierarchy, we can actually manipulate the parent geometry, and simply, nothing is as tricky as this to get the desired result. But then we start to think of how we're going to do that in other ways, and methods that are not necessarily familiar. And the point being, the whole reason for this is, like, if you're maybe following a tutorial or something like that, it's kind of like on rails. You don't want to just be able to have one solution, especially if you're doing client work and stuff like that. You need to be able to think on your feet and think creatively. So this gets you thinking like that, hopefully. So I'm not going to go through all of these in great detail, but the FFD deformer allows us to actually take points of the geometry and just manipulate those. So that was a simple one, just to take these top points and bring them down to create the shape. The correction deformer similarly does the same kind of thing. And another one that may not be obvious is actually using a displacer. So what is this is doing is taking grayscale values, and so I thought, well, a gradient, we could use that, where it's white, it's actually going to displace the most. So after a little bit of adjusting in the gradient, and I actually had to tweak the deformer slightly, tweak the geometry slightly to get this to look exactly the same, but it got me there to the same looking result. Now another one is using effectors, like the plane effector, as a deformer. And we'll jump into our demo scene and just work through this one so we can remove our taper. So if we take a plane effector, which is here, make that a child, switch over to the deformer tab, and we'll go into polygon mode. We don't want to move this at all. So we'll disable the position, but we want to scale it. So I'll just change this to 0.5, and if we do an absolute mode, this is going to scale it all down. But then we have the control over this by using fields. So we can bring in something like maybe a box field, and if I just make this a bit shorter, and all I need to do now is just remove this, move this up to that top polygon, and it's going to start to have that effect. So, oh, I think I just need to change my. I can change this to -1. Yeah. So there we go. So we're getting the same look, and a completely different method, and that's another one. So I wanted to actually move on to some of the ones that are a bit more less obvious, which we can talk about, and these are capsules. So this is a good introduction to nodes, because you can essentially, these are like pre-built nodes that you can use inside of the object manager. So it's like bridging that gap. So what we need to do is we can take these kind of procedural selections and things like that, and then in a non-destructive way transform the geometry. So we'll go through this first one in our little separate scene here. So we'll get rid of the plane. And you can find capsules in the asset browser. If we switch over to nodes, we'll just find a selection first. So we have a whole list of different types of selections. We could select with this capsule here, or we could use the select facing, which would give us a selection based on the normals. But let's just grab the selection like this. And when you're working with selections in this way, it's not immediately obvious what you're actually selecting, which is hopefully going to change soon. But what we can do to kind of get around that is to store the selection and then apply it to a material to give us a visual. So if I just give this selection a name, like top, because I want it to be the top polygon. I'm in polygon mode here. And we'll just quickly create a material. And I'll make it red just so it's obvious to see. And apply this to the cube, and we'll drop it into our selection here. Now we don't have a selection at the moment. The flow of information is top to bottom. So what we need to do is give this a selection string. So what we're just saying is which polygon do we want to select. So if I put in 1, then now we have that first polygon selected. And to save all the guesswork, I'm just going to type 4. This will give us our top polygon, right? So we no longer really need this store selection. We have this information in the select capsule. From there, we can come into our geometry modifiers, and we want to transform the elements that we have here. So in our polygon mode, the selection string is going to be passed through from that previous capsule, so it's all flowing down. So we don't need to do anything here, or if we wanted to be explicit, we could actually re-enable our store selection, bring in our selection that we have here. And then we need to scale this down. So just 0.5, 0.5, like so. But then the axis is in the wrong place. So we can then start to manipulate that, and then we get to that same looking result that we had before. So there's a few ways of doing that. And then if we come back into this example, I'm just going to let's solo this. So let's come back here, and we can start to step through that. So again, selecting what we want. So we have that same type of thing that we've already worked through. We could transform the element to just flatten this down and move the pivot point. And then we can say, hey, there's another node, another capsule we can use called polygon bevel, which will then bring this up and bring it in based on these parameters that we've got here. So we're just adjusting that offset and then insetting by 50%. So another way of doing it. But then we can also try and rebuild what we've just done with capsules as well. So if we select this one and have a look. So what we've got here is, we don't even need this geometry axis. I'm just saying there's another way of just moving that, that pivot point, right? This is just another node, but it's actually all inside the transform element as well. So yes, we could have taken one of those out. But what we're doing is essentially moving our pivot, flattening this down, selecting our top polygon, insetting it, which is another operation of that polygon bevel that we had here. And then all I'm doing is saying I want to take this selection, transfer it from polygons to edges, and then move those edges in edge mode over here up. And again, we've got the same look, but we're thinking about this completely differently. So let's close that down, and we'll talk about a few of these generated methods with spline generators and things like that. So these are probably immediately obvious to anyone who's used Cinema 4D, but we have a loft over here, and all I'm doing is saying, right, well, there's a couple of rectangles, and we're just going to take that one and make the shape described by those two splines. So another way is just to extrude, very simply, just taking one input here, and then the key thing to doing this is just to get into your caps. So you can separate the elements, so you don't actually have to, which is important, so then we can just start working on a particular targeted area. So I'm just working with that end cap and moving it up in a linear way, which is what we're doing here, based on this shape depth, which I've actually had to just increase to like 165, and that gets me to, yeah, where I needed to be. Now, another method that may not be one that anyone would jump to is coding this. So we can do this with Python, and made the font super big for your benefit over there at the back. Hopefully you can see that. So what we're doing is we can say, right, let's make a cube and assign it to a variable. Let's make a taper and assign it to a variable. And all we're doing, if we just work through our example here, is saying, right, take that taper, put it underneath the cube, stuff that we're doing in regular Cinema 4D, then set the properties of the taper. So if we come over here, you can see reducing this by half, removing the curvature. And this last line here is saying, right, this size that we have on the taper should be exactly the same size as the properties that we have on the cube. So it's like this fit parent button. We're kind of just coding that ourselves. And then all these last two lines is just to make it the same green color that we have in the viewport. And then we're returning that cube to the viewport. So you can actually build your own geometry using Python in Cinema 4D and manipulate it as well. You could even go much, much further with this. But I think it's probably worth diving into nodes now to sort of get those, like, we can go from quite high level to low level with this this stuff. So the nodes, again, sort of relatively new, not something I'm using all the time, but something I'm very interested in. I know this is where Cinema 4D is going, so I think it's worth, you know, having an active interest in it, right? So let's talk about this setup that I have here. All these are just little containers, little groups, literally like grabbing a whole load of objects and Alt-G, putting it into a null kind of thing. But it's a group, and then I'm applying a different color and sending it to the scene. So this is what this is doing, right? So we'll dive into this group, take a look at this first very simple example. So we are using just two nodes to get to this result. When you bring in, your first instinct might be to say, oh, I want to create a cube. So I'm going to type in cube, right? And filters down and gives us this cube. But this is not ready to go to the scene just yet. This is just a container of points. And it doesn't actually have that like level that we need to be to actually send it to the scene. You have to wrap it in a geometry operation. But this one here it's all ready to go. It has a matrix, right? We can actually manipulate its coordinates and things like that. This is very bare bones, just points. But you can right click and toggle the node type to promote it to kind of like a more high level, ready to go kind of thing. So this, you'll have to note the flow of the data. We couldn't really say taper nothing. We're giving the taper something to work with. And then that just gets sent out here, and we'll come back up, and it is part of our scene now because it's all connected up. So we're going to dive into a more complex example. Not really, but I've just explained that when you create a cube, it's like a container of these points, right? So another node that we'll need to add to bring it into the scene is the geometry operation, and then we can flow that into the taper. And this matrix actually doesn't have to be here. I've got it here just to move it in the scene. But this can actually go a different place. So I'm just going to disconnect this. Oops, just double click this here. And it can, you can see the operation, the op has an input here, and this will allow us to put this here. But you can think that you can start to then build parent and child hierarchies and have them manipulate in different ways. Okay, so now we can move on to another one. And this one, an alternative method where I'm working through what we just did with capsules. So taking a cube, using these pre-built things that we're actually now more familiar with because we've been exposed to capsules a bit longer, and now we can go in a couple of different directions. The beauty of nodes, we can decide, do I want to flow off this way or do this one? So the select facing is based on the normal. I can plug that in, and it's doing exactly the same sort of thing, but it's just a different operation. Or we can choose to select based on the top polygon. So then that transform element node that we just worked in regular Cinema 4D that we're so comfortable with is just right here in the scene nodes as well. And then putting it into the geometry and then applying a matrix again, we know that we could move this to the other side if we wanted to, but I'm just showing a very specific sort of flow of ideas. And then let's dive into this one where this is a bit sort of in the weeds now, right? So we know, again, this collection of points. We can manipulate those points. If we have an array, this is like a data container, a data structure. So yeah, we can start to rebuild those points, and you can see I can, manipulate this however I like. And then all we're doing is setting those points. So we're saying, hey, this set of points here, now you have these new positions, and now we're just going to put those back into the scene. So why would you do this when you can get this whole result done with just 2 nodes? Well, I don't know. But it gives you like a deeper understanding of it. And hopefully, when a more complex setup comes along, you can say, oh, actually, yeah, I can just build the array and blah, 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 whatever. Right. So let's come back to our presentation here. So hopefully, goals of this part were just to sort of promote creative thinking, discovering new workflows, and enhance your general knowledge of Cinema 4D. So taking that to a more real-world example, let's think about how we can take a rope bridge and use some different methods to get a similar result. You may have time constraints, you may not have time for simulation, or you can't go into the full detail of it. So let's just see if we can get there with a few different methods, right? So I'm going to close these down. We don't need these anymore. And let's just get rid of that one. And let's just grab our... So we're going to start with a spline wrap method. And another deformer, something that I use often. And it's a great way of achieving this result. So we can bring in a spline wrap. We have our bridge all set up under here, under this hierarchy. When you're using deformers, they can be children, or they can be on the same level of hierarchy. And that's what this null object is doing. It's bringing the bridge and the spline wrap together, so they can now talk to each other. We can apply a spline, and it's gone a bit crazy, but we need to look at the direction of our axis here, z-axis. So we can flip this over, and then all we need to do is just come in and I'm just going to adjust, not the size, but the rotation, and bring this over. And now we have achieved a look quite quickly. Of course, you're going to want to come in and manipulate these splines here so that they line up and do all of that, but that's a little bit more work, but mostly we're there. The next thing would just be to adjust the ropes, and this could just be done by simply manipulating like the points with the spline pen. If I can see what I'm doing here. We can bring that down quite quickly. Now, I want to just move on to a different example. I'll show you the end state. So like after a little bit of work, we've kind of got it how we want it to be. So this mesh deformer is another tool that we can use in our arsenal. So this will take this mesh, and I want to talk about like a more traditional cloth workflow before the new simulation system. So we've got this plane, and we can say, let's just come into our top mode. And we'll make it editable because I want to access the points. And in our selection, we can do a rectangular selection. Let's come in. And I'm going to grab these top points here. Come out. I'll hold down Shift. And we'll bring this into our selection as well. And I'm going to come into our tags, simulation tags, and add cloth. Now this, because this is a mesh, we actually get the dresser tab. You can put these on primitives and generators and stuff, but we wouldn't have access to this specific tab. What we can do is say fix these points, and they've changed color now. And if we come out into this perspective view, we can rewind and play. Let's just come into this mode here, and you'll be able to see it's sagging. It's not really doing too much of what we want it to do. So we can take out like the bendiness. We can then start to come into the project settings in the simulation tab and start to stiffen this up. Like we can increase our sub steps and maybe adjust a bit of damping just to kind of take that energy out. And now we kind of, if we pause it, we get to a sort of look that we like. And if we want, we could fix this in place. But what I want to do is come back and apply this deformation to the geometry. So we can do this with another deformer. So this is our mesh deformer. Again, we're bringing it into that same level of hierarchy. And it's looking for an object now to kind of follow along with. So we'll bring in the plane and initialize this. And I'll just hide the plane so we don't get distracted by it. And if we press play now, nothing's going to happen. That is because this flat plane is not encapsulating the mesh. That's another thing. So in our advanced section here, we can choose to manipulate by the surface, and suddenly we now have a result. We also have the animation as well if we choose to use it. So we could then start to add forces to this and make this a bit more like, it's a bit of a dangerous looking bridge anyway as it is, but we could do that. So the other advantage is, look at this, right? We don't even have to come in and manipulate these points anymore. It's kind of all doing it for us. We're getting that for free and saving ourselves a bit more time just by exploring another method. And it didn't take that long to do. So let's come in and check out. Let me just check out here. So I'm going to find the end result. I think it's pretty much exactly the same as I had it. Yeah. So yeah, we're all good there. And I'm going to come down to this other method where we can use the traditional or the new cloth, right? So I've added a bit more time and made the bridge look a bit more stylized. But there's some important things to note as well. We've got areas of the bridge with like gaps and stuff. So we're kind of thinking where this is going to start to collide and interact. So we can add a cloth tag to a generator, which is fantastic, right? So we can do this, come back out and press play, and it's just going to fall down, right? So we need a way of fixing these end splines to our target areas, which is like around here. And we can do that by bringing in this this geometry into the cloth system, all right? So I'm going to do that now. If I were to press play, which I won't bother because it'll just fall down because it's got gravity acting on it, right? So we want to essentially fix this in place. Now we have this really cool tab, which is you're allowed to like mix animation. If this was an animated object, we could mix that in with the dynamic simulation, which is really cool. But I like to just use it in a way to fix the object in place. So it's saying what influence should the cloth have on this, or what influence should the animation have on this? And I'm saying 100%. So the cloth should have no influence, right? And now this will be fixed in place, but we still have our problem that our main element that we want to simulate is moving away. So now that this is part of the cloth system, we can add a connector, and we can start to say, right, look at the geometry that's around you and the points that are around you and grab onto them. And we can do that based on this search radius. So if I increase that and just create some connections, you'll see these yellow visual in the viewport here now is sort of grabbing onto that. And if we play this now, it's going to hold on to that as best as it can. And we probably want to stick a collider on this just so we get some better interaction. So this thing here, we could do that. So then we probably want to just double check that that's created again. And now we're getting that sort of collision happening. Again, we need to work on this a bit more. But if we just come back now and just check what's going on in the main scene. So it's suddenly like, yeah, this is pretty dangerous, right? We need to fix this a bit. No one's going to walk across this bridge. So we need to take again, we're going to do those same processes and take out the bendiness, make this a bit more rigid by increasing our substeps. And this is kind of like where you're going to be doing a lot of your work. Reducing some of the energy. You could, of course, add some friction and things like that. And this is starting to look a bit better. But we could also say, well, you know what? I want to art direct the forces here, right? I don't want to use the whole scene gravity anymore. I'm going to bring in my own gravity object. And then I can use a field to restrict this to maybe a certain area. So I'm sort of stylizing this even more. And then if we just say the most influence should be in the middle here and the least at the edges, then maybe we'll get a better kind of look. It's a little bit more stable. Again, simulations take time, so you'll need to go in and dial in settings for sure. But we can, if we have a bit more time to work on this, we can get to a nicer looking result. And it's jumping all over. So yeah, we've really kind of stylized that, and it's just not been, I think I added some friction. So again, I was taking some elements, some energy out based on the angular strength and as well. But this is kind of cool, and we can certainly work on it further. But like it's getting to a decent look, and if we come back to the presentation, yeah, that's kind of where I ended up with it for now. And then bringing that into this element into a more built-out scene, we can produce some pretty images, and this could be a nice animation as well. So yeah, a lot of fun to play with these different methods for sure. And I'm going to talk about the simulation scene, because another thing that we can do is actually combine different types of simulations with different rules. And we, this is like, if you've used X particles before, a simulation scene is kind of like a system object. And that's how I'm sort of relating to it. I can actually take different forces and share them across different things or things like that. But yeah, let's dive into that now. And I'm going to just close this out. Okay. Right, so we're back to here. And I'm going to search for this. And so, yeah, we have our spheres that we'd like to bring in. And with these are just, I've just added a cloth tag, and I have got a field force, which is just doing giving them some random movement, which is quite nice. Let's take a look at how we could use the balloon to inflate these. If we increase our overpressure, they're going to go crazy, right? So we could make this a bit more gentle, based over 100 frames. And now we have them, just blowing up nicely. This could just be one little element that we want to create, but this is kind of moving a bit too much. So I can actually come in and reduce the substeps and kind of make it a bit more like basic, and this kind of feels a bit more controlled. There's not so much rotation happening here. You can see that I've got a very small amount of gravity going in the positive direction, so these are floating up. So now I want to add my other elements to this, which is these planes. And if I bring those into the system, with cloth, well, they're not going to do too much because all that's happening is the field forces affecting them and maybe a bit of the positive gravity, but this isn't exactly what I want for this. And I probably want to change some of the substeps on that, but I don't want to change the substeps on the sphere because I've already dialed that in. I'm happy with that now. This is how we can use a simulation scene to solve this problem, right? So we'll make this one for our spheres. And we want to come into the scene and bring in the balloon. We can bring in the field force. And if we do this now, they're going to fall because we haven't changed our settings, right? So they've got the default settings. So we could come in to our project settings, Control or Command D to get to those. And then in the simulation, we can select all of this stuff, right-click, copy, come over to our simulation scene object, same tab, same settings, exactly the same, no worries. Right-click and just paste that. And we want to just dial in our gravity to be exactly the same. Super easy, right? And now when we press play, that's working as expected. Okay. You could at this point, I guess, now that you've got those contained, you could then do the global settings for the other elements in the scene. You could definitely do that. But just to show you what I'm trying to, just to complete the thought, we'll do this for our cloth. So we have a new simulation scene for our cloth. And we'll bring in these tags. So we can select them both, come over here, and then just use the eyedropper and pick one, and it will bring them all in. And again, we've seen that we can just drag and drop forces in here. So if we do rewind and press play, they're going to fall down, but they're not interacting with our spheres. So that's kind of missing the point of this. But one thing that you can share across simulation scenes as well as forces, right? You can share colliders. So we can take our spheres and say, you're also a collider. And then in our simulation scene for the cloth, we can say, take a look at the collider and hopefully interact with those objects. So this is, now we can then start to dial in the cloth that we have here and adjust the settings like individually. And completely different simulation types, but we can combine them using in this way, which is pretty nice. So after a little bit more working there, we can have some fun with it. Start to produce some pretty looking animations or whatever. So yeah, let's move on and talk about something that I'm adding to my toolkit, which is a bit of sculpting. So very, very new to things like ZBrush. But I love it. It's really cool. And it's great that it's part of Maxon 1, And what's improved in this release of Cinema 4D is the GoZ import-export workflow. So I'm still comfortable working in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to probably want to stay there as much as possible. So in this regard, I'm just like, let's just open up the demo scene so we can take a look. I want to build out my shapes. And I know I could do it in ZBrush if I, take a bit more time to learn it, right? But it's about a comfort level at the moment. And I want to just ease myself into this new software. So we'll open up these for now. And let's just break it down into different stages, right? So we have, we're going to start by like blocking this out and grabbing our base shapes and just saying, we're going to make something that kind of roughly resembles a floating island or whatever. So once we've kind of gone through that process and connected them all together, then what we could do is say, well, I want this to be like one object now. So I will use a mesh builder to bring this in and maybe reduce this down. And I could also like smooth this out and then come over and take that volume, mesh it, so we have the geometry. And it's quite heavy, so I could adjust the adaptive threshold here. And, that's sort of all right. and I could then use a tool that's actually come over from ZBrush, which is Remesh. So we have the Z Remesher here, and this will have a look at that geometry and then give it a much nicer flow. And at this point, yeah, I could go to a different workflow that I know, which would be, let's just take that whole thing. And I love the fact that you can copy and paste into C4D from different documents. Really cool. Anyway, coming in, and that's just still thinking about remeshing, so that's why it's just looking like that. Yeah, another thing that's actually new, let me just see, yeah. Another thing that's actually new in this release or quality of life improvement you may have seen, I always find that the work plane kind of tends to get in my way, especially when there's a heavy mesh. So you can actually come and just draw it behind, so it's still there, but you get to focus on the object. Just wanted to point that out because I find it very useful. So I probably could take this and maybe just connect the objects and delete for now and bring this in and then start to work with some deformers that are familiar, like FFD, and maybe taper this down a bit. And then at this point, you could start to build the whole look with deformers using displacers and stuff like that, because we've got quite a decent underlying mesh. But let's just, yeah, let's just see what we can do with the ZBrush. So I'll take this. I'll take this and I'm going to take the current state to object. I think I'll do that. And so what we have now is a mesh. If we hide all of this, it has those deformations applied to it, and we can just say in our extensions, export to ZBrush, and yeah, no, I'll just say no. So I can bring this in, and I can, oops. So I can bring this in, press T to start editing this, and if I just move this over, I can then start to draw onto this and sculpt into it. And I know it's a rock. There's like such a typical way of learning ZBrush, I guess, but you know, now we have this sort of another workflow. And if I increase my size a bit, I can start to experiment with some maybe more suitable brushes. So we're just pressing B to bring up the brushes, and then using maybe like an alpha just to really sort of square this off and start to, you know, work into this. One thing that stumped me is obviously the navigation is different coming from C4D to ZBrush. So that's like another thing to get a bit more familiar with. But if I'm outside of this object and I click and drag, I can start to orbit around it. And then if I just right click, Alt and click, I can just move it, and then I'm mixing different methods because I know there's a few ways of navigating in ZBrush as well, but I'm kind of like hacking together something that works for me. So anyway, obviously you need a bit more sort of time to get into this. But another thing that I love as well is like masking something out, right? So if I hold down Control or Command, I could maybe mask out this section. And then I was told that I could use the move brush, but I could also just take this geometry here, switch into this mask, switch into move mode. And I think if I alt click, I can change the pivot. And that's like unlocked this now. And I could move this section out. So now I'm going back into my draw mode, and I've now created a new element that I can sort of sculpt into. But this is like, if we show our mesh, yeah, quite, I guess it's fairly low res, I don't know. But like if I wanted to, then I can start to divide it and build it up. And with coming into this geometry section, and I think this is the Dynamesh, yeah. And this will just really make it that's way too heavy. I think I definitely need to change my resolution there. But I can come back a few steps and just get back to where I needed to be, right? So let's just say that this is, I'm very happy with this, even though I'm not. But let's just talk about getting it back to Cinema 4D. So I can, I also like to, because when you're sending it back, if it's the same name, it will probably overwrite the geometry that's selected there. So I'm going to rename this just to Floating Island. Right. And then we can select the visible things and send them back, right? Now, we haven't done much sculpting on this, but because I think I'm running out of time, unfortunately. I'd have loved to have done a bit more on this, but I can move this over and you can see there was some elements that we worked on in ZBrush, and it's come back to Cinema 4D. So yeah, again, with a bit more time, we can take it from quite basic to a little bit more detailed and stylized, and this may only end up being like a background element, not like a hero asset or whatever, but because I haven't got that level of ability personally yet. So, but it's a lot of fun, and I find it very, very therapeutic as well. So, something that now that it's just available and accessible and easy to kind of get into, I just am looking for more ways to add it to my workflow. So, yeah, there's a turntable of this thing, whatever it is. It needs some more work, but I'd like you to take away a few things. Hopefully, going back to that idea of taking a really simple concept, try and reimagine how you recreate it with different tools to hopefully discover new workflows and store those in the memory for, future projects where it might demand a different way of thinking. And in so doing, you bring up your overall knowledge of Cinema 4D. Been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I really appreciate Maxon for bringing me out. And my name's Andy Needham, and thank you so much.